Hey everybody, what's going on? This is Sam from Historic Travels and welcome to another video. And guys, the time you all have been waiting on for quite a while has finally come. It is now time to conclude the complete story of Captain Smith and his actions on board the RMS Titanic on the night of the sinking. Now guys, this is part 2 of this video series, and you need to watch part 1 before you watch this video because the events in this video directly start up right after part 1 ended. So if you want to watch that video first, which again, you need to, there is a link for that video in the description below. Oh, and before we get started, there is a Patreon for this YouTube channel as well as a merch store if you would like to take any extra steps to help support this channel. Thank you guys so much for all the support. Alright guys, well hey, with that out of the way, let's now continue the story of Captain Smith, one of the Titanic's greatest heroes. The following video wouldn't have been possible without the collective works of Titanic Honor and Glory, Part-Time Explorer, Titanic Animations, Maritime Interactive, and the incredible Titanic book On a Sea of Glass. Please check out all of their work in the description below. We are resuming Captain Smith's story at 12:28 a.m. on board the RMS Titanic. At this time, Captain Smith is on the Titanic's bridge with 4th Officer Boxhall, and the two men are discussing the mystery ship seen off of the Titanic's port side. Now, during this exact same conversation, 4th Officer Boxhall asked Captain Smith if the situation was serious. Captain Smith then told Boxhall that it was. He also told Boxhall that Thomas Andrews, the Titanic's designer, didn't give the ship more than an hour to an hour and a half to live. Captain Smith also informed Boxhall that he had given the Titanic's position to Jack Phillips and Harold Brad to put into the Titanic's distress call message. Now, during this conversation, Boxhall informed Captain Smith that the Titanic was actually a little bit further ahead than where the ship's official position in the logbook said the Titanic was. After hearing this, Captain Smith then told Boxhall to go and double-check the ship's position and give that updated position to Jack Phillips and Harold Brad to put into the distress call message. After this brief conversation between Smith and Boxhall, Boxhall then went to try to figure out the Titanic's position. Then he was going to compare the position he got with what Captain Smith got. And sure enough, after he did this, he discovered that Captain Smith's estimate to the Titanic's position was off. So, Boxhall updated the position and then took that update to Jack Phillips and Harold Brad so they could put it in the Titanic's distress call message. Now, it should also be pointed out that while Boxhall's estimate wasn't as far off as Captain Smith's, Boxhall's position wasn't accurate either. Captain Smith's estimate as to the Titanic's position was off by roughly 20 miles, while Boxhall's estimate was off by roughly 13 miles. Now, it was Boxhall's coordinates that the RMS Carpathia would use when it was trying to find the Titanic survivors. So, honestly, it was kind of semi-dumb luck that the Carpathia was able to find the Titanic survivors. Although I do have a theory on how the Carpathia may have stumbled across the Titanic survivors. However, I'm not going to be talking about that in this video. I did cover it in another video. If you would like to watch that video, I will include a link to that video in the description below. After Captain Smith learned about the mystery ship seen off of the Titanic's port side, he became extremely hopeful that that ship would eventually come and help rescue everybody who was on board the Titanic. Now, from Captain Smith's perspective on the bridge, he determined that that ship was roughly 10 miles or so away from the Titanic. The Titanic could clearly see the ship on the horizon, so logically that ship should be able to see the Titanic as well. He informed Jack Phillips and Harold Brad about the mystery ship and told them to try to contact it. He also told other members of his crew to try to signal the ship with the Titanic's Morse lamps, and he also ordered distress rockets to be fired as well. Now, that mystery ship was later determined to be the SS Californian, and they could see the Titanic off in the distance. However, the Californian's radio operator had went to bed, so the Californian didn't have its radio turned on, so it didn't pick up the Titanic's distress call. And the reason the Californian didn't respond to the Titanic's Morse lamps or distress rockets was because there was a weird weather phenomenon going on called a cold water mirage, and it was distorting the light coming from the Titanic towards the mystery ship. So it basically confused the officers on the Californian as to what they were seeing on the horizon. But anyway, Captain Smith would continue to make efforts to try to contact this mystery ship throughout the sinking, and as some of the lifeboats were lowered over the Titanic side, Captain Smith even told those lifeboats to try to row towards the mystery ship. Captain Smith really did put a lot of his hopes on that strange ship seen off in the horizon. However, unfortunately, the Californian would never take notice of the Titanic situation, and the ship never came to lend aid to the RMS Titanic. Now, just a real quick side note here. Before all of you all watching this video jump into the comments section and start raging about the Californian and typing things out like, how come the Californian didn't investigate the Titanic? Even with the weird weather phenomenon going on, surely they would have noticed that something weird was going on with that ship off in the distance, you know? Even if the Californian couldn't make out the Titanic's Morse lamp, why didn't they even try to contact that ship, even if they didn't know it was the Titanic? Why did the Californian ignore the distress rockets? Surely that ship could have seen that, right? Well, before you all type out all that, I want you to know that the Californian did notice the Titanic, and they did take steps to try to contact the Titanic. However, I would argue that the only thing the Californian is truly guilty of is just not doing enough. They did take some steps, however, they didn't do enough, and I'll explain this really briefly. You see, the Californian did try to contact the Titanic by means of the Californian's Morse lamp. However, just like the issue that the Titanic's crew was facing, the weird weather phenomenon going on that night distorted the Californian's Morse lamp light just like it did the Titanic's. So people on both ships thought that they were seeing something, however, they weren't really sure, you know, they were both dealing with that. And when it comes to the Titanic's distress rockets, well, you see, this is where the Titanic's crew messed up a little bit, and it's still unclear as to why they did this. You see, rockets can mean a multitude of things at sea. One such thing that they can mean is company signals. And the thing is, the Titanic's crew did not launch its rockets correctly for them to mean distress. The law in 1912 is very clear on this. For rockets launched by a ship at sea to mean distress, rockets have to be launched in 1-minute intervals. However, in the case of Titanic, its rockets were going up every 5 minutes or so. So while it is true that the Californian's crew did see the rockets being launched from Titanic, well, due to this big time delay, they just didn't understand. You know, they didn't know what was going on. And this brings up my ultimate point here. You see, if I would have been the captain of the Californian, whose name was Stanley Lord, if I saw a ship off in the distance and I thought the ship might have been acting weird, I thought I saw distress rockets, or I saw rockets going up from the ship, even if they weren't launched in a way to mean distress, I would at least go and wake up the wireless guy and have him try to contact the ship by that means, just to make sure that everything is okay. You know, when in doubt, play it safe. You know, you want to make sure everything's okay, even if you're confused about what's going on and you don't know for certain if something's wrong. Just play it safe. That is the big thing that I think the Californian's crew is guilty of. They didn't take more steps than they should have just to make sure that everything was okay with that mystery ship. And unfortunately, everything was not okay. The Californian would remain in its current position until the Titanic sank. And they wouldn't learn until the next morning after the wireless guy woke up about what had really happened to the ship that was seen off in the distance. Over the course of the next few minutes, the Titanic would successfully contact a good number of ships by means of the Titanic's Marconi wireless system. And at 12:37 a.m., the Titanic would finally contact its would-be savior ship, the RMS Carpathia, which was somewhere around 55 miles away from the Titanic. Once the Carpathia's crew learned that the Titanic was in trouble and sinking, the Carpathia immediately changed course and began to head towards the Titanic. However, at being more than 55 miles away, it would take the Carpathia around 4 hours to reach the Titanic's position. Harold Brad took this message to Captain Smith and told him around what time the Carpathia would arrive. However, once Captain Smith learned that it would take the Carpathia around 4 hours to reach the Titanic, while he didn't tell Harold Brad directly, he knew that that wouldn't be fast enough to reach the Titanic's position. All Captain Smith could do at this point was continue to assist with the evacuation, and just hope that maybe, just maybe, another ship could reach the Titanic in time. Now, another thing that I was trying to figure out when I was researching the story of Captain Smith for today's video was I was trying to find out if there was any truth in the rumor about him that states that during the evacuation of the Titanic, Captain Smith was seen, and it appeared to those who saw him that he wasn't handling the situation very well. You know, he was staring off into space, you know, and just not being the type of person that a captain should be in an emergency crisis like this. And as I was reading Captain Smith's story and keeping an eye out for anything that could back up any of the claims made in this rumor, at first I wasn't coming across anything that gave any justification to this rumor whatsoever. it seemed like that Captain Smith was doing the best job he could under incredibly stressful circumstances. I mean, I can't imagine what it must have been like for him on the night that the Titanic went down. However, I did start to see some of the behaviors mentioned in that rumor right around this point in the sinking, right after he found out that the Carpathia wasn't going to arrive at the Titanic's location in time and everything. And honestly, it makes sense that he may have gotten a little bit overwhelmed mentally at this point in time because, after he learned that the Carpathia wasn't going to reach the Titanic in time, Captain Smith would have known that there weren't enough lifeboats on the Titanic for everyone on board. And under the best case scenario, that around half of the people on the Titanic were going to die. And that's if all the lifeboats were filled to capacity and there were no issues with the evacuation. So, I mean, how would you handle knowing something like that? Knowing that half the people on the ship that you're in charge of were going to die in the next hour or two. I mean, that would be so overwhelming for somebody mentally. I mean, I can't even imagine it. Now, over the course of the next hour or so, this is the point in time where it seems like that Captain Smith may have been a little bit distant in his thoughts. And I did find an official story to back up this claim. This story comes from a passenger on the Titanic by the name of Huell Warner, and he encountered Captain Smith during the full-on evacuation of the Titanic, and he saw Captain Smith ordering some of the Titanic's passengers to go down from the boat deck and wait for a lifeboat right around here on the A-deck promenade. And Captain Smith's intention was to have lifeboats lowered from the boat deck, go down to the A-deck promenade, and then they would step through those windows and get into a lifeboat. However, Huell Warner told Captain Smith, well, wait, don't you know that there are glass windows? Like, there's glass in all of these promenade windows there. You'd have to open those before you could get passengers through them and get them into a lifeboat. And Captain Smith went, oh, yeah, you're right. Okay, have those passengers come back up. And so the ultimate question is, why would Captain Smith make this mistake, Why would he forget that there are glass windows down there on the A-deck promenade? And it's probably because he was feeling overwhelmed mentally. He just wasn't thinking clearly. And another reason why he may have made this mistake was because of the last ship that he sailed on. The last ship that he was in command of before the Titanic was the Titanic's sister ship, the Olympic, which was the near identical sister ship to the Titanic. However, unlike the Titanic, the Olympic didn't have the enclosed A-deck promenade like the Titanic did. On the Olympic, the promenade, all of the windows there were open. Anybody could step through them. They didn't have the glass there like the Titanic did. So it's possible that during this mental instability, phase that he was going through at this time, that he may have made this mistake. So anyway, this was one official story that I found that seemed to back up the claim a little bit that he may have been somewhat distant at a certain point in the evacuation. However, for the most part, Captain Smith was alert and doing everything he could to save as many lives as possible on the Titanic. And he would snap out of this mental distant phase not long after this story occurred.
Now, over the course of the next hour or so, this is the point in time where Captain Smith's activities on the Titanic are, for the most part, unknown. There are some scattered reports that he was seen on the Titanic's port side helping assist with the evacuation. However, these are just very brief and scattered reports. There's also another claim that he was present in the officers' quarters when Chief Officer Henry Wilde distributed the firearms that were on the Titanic to some of the Titanic's officers. So, based on this claim, I would guess that it's most likely that Captain Smith, for the most part, remained in close proximity to the Titanic's bridge, so if anybody needed him, they would know where to find him. I would guess that this is probably why there aren't too many reports of him during this point in the sinking. This was because he was always hanging out at the very front of the Titanic and not near the lifeboats where a good number of people could see him.
The next confirmed sighting of Captain Smith occurred at roughly 1:56 a.m. from within the Titanic's bridge. At this point in time, Captain Smith was seen talking with another one of his officers. It was either Chief Officer Henry Wilde or Second Officer Charles Lightoller, we're not sure which. But anyway, the men were discussing how at this point in time, the rate at which the Titanic was sinking seemed to accelerate. The men knew that they did not have that much time left before the Titanic went down. The men were also discussing that a good number of the lifeboats that had already been launched from the Titanic, well, they could tell that these boats had nowhere near their maximum carrying capacity in them. There was a lot more room for more people within these boats that had already left the ship. So, with time rapidly running out, Captain Smith did the only thing he could do.
He took his speaking megaphone and walked out onto the Titanic's portside boat deck right around here and yelled through the megaphone at all the lifeboats that were currently in the water to come back to the Titanic and pick up more passengers.
This is the captain calling all boats. Return to the ship. Pull back, pull back, pull back to the ship. Pull back to the ship. Come around to the starboard side to bring aboard more passengers. Pull back. All boats pull back. This is the captain. Pull back to the ship.
However, despite Captain Smith's orders, not a single lifeboat returned to the Titanic to pick up more passengers. However, one lifeboat did attempt the captain's orders. This lifeboat was lifeboat number 2, which had just been launched from the very front of the Titanic on the port side, right around the area where Captain Smith was yelling at the other lifeboats through his speaking megaphone. This lifeboat was led by 4th Officer Boxhall, and he did attempt to follow the captain's orders. Captain Smith told this lifeboat to go over to the Titanic's starboard side and pick up more people from there. Now, this was an extremely difficult thing for Boxhall to do because his lifeboat, as I said, was launched from the very front of the Titanic's port side. So, once lifeboat number 2 touched the water, what Boxhall decided to do was sail his lifeboat along the Titanic's port side, go around the Titanic's stern, and cross over into the starboard side, and this is where he would pick up more passengers. However, by the time that Boxhall attempted this, too much time had passed and the Titanic was in its final stages of sinking. So Boxhall had no choice but to pull away from the Titanic without picking up any additional passengers.
Captain Smith continued to try to get the lifeboats to return to the Titanic for right around a minute or so. After this amount of time had passed, he saw that no boats were returning to the Titanic, so he abandoned his efforts to get the boats to come back. At this point in time, Captain Smith knew that the end was near for the Titanic, so he then set out to go and release as many of his crewmen as possible, so these men at least had a shot at saving their own lives. The first place Captain Smith went to was the Marconi room, where, despite the fact that the Titanic's power was so weak at this point it could barely send out a signal, Jack Phillips and Harold Brad were still trying to send out a very weak distress signal from the Titanic. Captain Smith walked into the Marconi room and told the 2 men in there that they had done their full duty, they could do no more, and it was time for them to abandon their cabin and save their own lives. However, despite the fact that Captain Smith gave the men this order, Jack Phillips and Harold Brad chose to remain in the Marconi room for a few more minutes, trying desperately to get another ship to the Titanic before the ship went down. I did make a complete video on the story of Jack Phillips and Harold Brad. If you would like to watch that video, there is a link for it in the description below.
After Captain Smith released Jack Phillips and Harold Brad and left the Marconi room, reports are kind of hit and miss as to where Captain Smith went next. The general consensus seems to be that after he left the Marconi room, he headed back out onto the Titanic's boat deck, where he continued to release more and more members of his crew and told them to try to save their own lives. This seems to have went on for roughly 10 minutes or so. After this happened, Captain Smith then returned to the bridge, where the last official sighting of Captain Smith took place.
It is now 2:11 a.m. on board the RMS Titanic. The Titanic's final plunge is about to begin. The Titanic's band is playing their final piece, Near My God to Thee. And all of the lifeboats, with the exception of 2 boats, Collapsible A and B, which are stored on the roof of the officers' quarters by the first funnel, have left the Titanic. The remaining members of the Titanic's crew that are still on board the ship are trying desperately to get Collapsible A and B ready for launch. Captain Smith is currently on the Titanic's bridge with the Titanic's designer Thomas Andrews, who are watching the water, slowly but surely starting to make its way up onto the Titanic's boat deck. As the water begins to flood over the Titanic's port side bridge wing, Captain Smith turns to Thomas Andrews and says to him, "There's no use in staying any longer. She is going. We have to go." At this point in time, Captain Smith and Thomas Andrews are seen jumping over the Titanic's port side bridge wing and swimming away from the Titanic, never to be seen again.
After Captain Smith and Thomas Andrews jumped from the Titanic's port side bridge wing and into the sea and swam away from the Titanic, we don't know for certain what happened to Captain Smith after this. The only thing we do know for certain is that he did die in the waters around where the Titanic sank, and unfortunately his body was never recovered. Now, after the Titanic went down, there are some unconfirmed reports that Smith may have been seen alive briefly after the Titanic sank. The most popular story that claims to have seen Smith happened at collapsible lifeboat B, where this lifeboat was one of the final to leave the Titanic and the crew was in such a hurry to launch it. Well, this lifeboat had accidentally gotten flipped upside down, and the men who were trying to stay alive on this boat were literally balancing on top of this upside down lifeboat, just trying to keep it from throwing all these men into the sea. It was a very delicate balancing act that everybody dealing with this boat was having to do. The story claims that while these men were balancing on collapsible B, a man came up to them and asked if he could get on board this boat, at which point another man who was on the boat told him, "No, there's too many people on this boat. If we take on one more person, this boat will sink." At which point the man in the water simply said, "All right, Ben, I understand, good luck, and God bless you," and this man swam away. The story claims that this man in the water was Captain Smith. However, as I said, the story is unconfirmed. It's just the most popular story to try to figure out what happened to Captain Smith after the Titanic went down. And with that final story out of the way, now all of you watching this video know the complete story of Captain Smith and what he did on board the RMS Titanic on the night of the sinking. And guys, after watching this video, I'm more convinced than ever that Captain Smith truly was one of the biggest heroes on board the Titanic that night. You know, based on everything that I saw, it's clear to me that he was really trying as hard as he could to save as many people as possible from the Titanic before the ship went down. All those claims out there that Captain Smith was just not handling the situation very well and not being a good captain, just staring off into space and all that, you know, I mean, sure, it seems like he did have a few moments where he got a little bit overwhelmed, but he snapped out of it shortly after, and he continued to do the best job he could under incredibly difficult circumstances. So honestly, I truly do believe that Captain Smith was one of the biggest heroes on board the Titanic, and I honestly believe his story should never be forgotten. This is Sam from Historic Travels, and I hope you enjoyed this video. I hope all of you out there have a great day, and I will see you all in the next one. Have a great day, everybody.